Hey y'all, it's Colton Woods, and today I want to talk to you about bumping versus pulling when it comes to working with our horses. And this will apply in your groundwork, it'll apply in your ridden work, and this is going to get some people all kerfuffled up and bound up in the comments, I'm sure. And it'll be the people that talk and act based on their feelings and not actually on what is logical and works for the horse. As horsemen, we got to set these things up to, one, benefit our horses, and also we have to find an approach that works for us as well, right? So I'm not saying that my way is the only way, but I'm saying what I try to share with you guys is the things that I have found to work best. This is a conversation that I have with people time and time and time again at clinics. And as we cut back on the number of clinics that we're doing, I'm trying to make a more of a concerted effort to get this information out there to you, because I know that there's a lot of you guys and a lot of your horses that could benefit from this. And so when it comes to bumping versus pulling, we're going to tackle this from two different elements, okay? At least two, okay? I'm not saying I might find a third rabbit trail to go down. The first one is the physical, and the second one is the mental, all right? And we could even touch on the emotional if we need to, okay? But here's the facts, is that you cannot pull softness into a horse. Let me put it that way. You cannot pull softness into a horse. I don't care whether, you especially cannot do that if you are riding in a hackamore. And we did a video on, if you want to become a better horseman, why learning how to ride in a hackamore will make you a better horseman, even if you primarily ride in a snaffle bit, even if you're primarily an English rider, how this piece of equipment can transform your ability. And if you're interested in that, I'll link it at the end of this video and you can watch that video next, okay? But even when most of us are riding in maybe something as simple as a snaffle bit, right? This hackamore and this snaffle bit, two very basic pieces of equipment that nearly every horse will get rode in one or the other at some point in their lifetime. Well, if you just pull on this, and I'll tell you guys a funny story here in a second. If you just pull on this, what's going to happen is your horse is going to get stiff, right? If you just pull on two reins. And so that funny story was early on when I was first starting training horses. I spent the better part of a decade riding hunters, jumpers, dressage horses, a few eventers, some off-the-track thoroughbreds, not Western horses, right? We're based in Lexington, Kentucky. That was our primary clientele. Great people, great horses, really enjoyed it. And so I had a couple hunters in the barn, and my wife could go showing the hunters, the warm blood hunters, not AQHA hunters. And we took a couple horses to a show. It was a Halloween show. And this horse that had been sent to me had kind of been cranked and spanked on, and so he'd get to a jump and then he'd freeze up and then he'd rear up and spin and run off. And he had learned that if you pulled a rein, you could pull his nose to his chin and he'd keep running out his outside shoulder. All those things were super handy, right? Like, he knew how to rear, he knew how to spin, he knew to run, and he knew how to run off through his outside shoulder. So we had our work cut out for us. And once we had kind of worked through a lot of that, it took quite a bit of time, and we got to where we were starting to horse show him again. The owners wanted us to horse show him to build his confidence back up and do that sort of stuff. We took him to this Halloween show, and my wife we just put him in some adult amateur classes, okay? And so we weren't like getting paid to show this horse or anything like that. Like, he was paid for training, but we're like, we're going to go show my wife's horse. If you want him to go with us, by all means, right? We'll take him. So we took him down there, and I was like, my wife's like, I want to show him his cute little horse. And then she was like, I'll just take him around a few classes. And I'm like, okay. So she took him around a few classes, and he went over this one jump. And when his hind feet hit the ground, he kicked that sand back after he landed on the other side of the fence. And they had a bunch of corn stalks because it was a Halloween show. And that sand, and it was like, psh, and it hit those corn stalks, if you can imagine what that sound would be like. And he kind of threw his head up and kind of scooted forward. And my wife, she's an amateur rider, She doesn't train professionally. She's super handy, and this was years ago. And she went ahead and took a hold of both hands and kind of tried to, and it was just a gut instinct. And she grew up in a very like typical hunter-jumper environment where that would have been the thing that you were taught. And she kind of just defaulted to that. And I'm standing at the outgate like any good English trainer would be for their non-pro or for their amateur thing. And all the other trainers are standing there watching this horse go around, and we're talking, and I'm coaching her through the course. And he kind of scoots and takes off a little bit, and I yell at her. I was like, quit pulling on two hands. You can't stop a runoff with two hands. And almost every head standing there next to me looked at me like I had lost my mind. You know, because they teach so much in the English world. They teach like, hey, if that horse takes off, just pull on it. Well, you give the horse so much leverage because they can lean against that bit and they can get straight, they can get stiff, and you give them power by pulling on two hands, and they can drive from their hind end forward to that bridle. And it's why like some dressage horses that are very physical in the hand, it's like a full-on, full-body workout to ride those horses, and it shouldn't be that way. But it's because they've taught that horse to lean so heavy, and they're so tight through the neck, and they're so locked up through the jaw, and they're driving from their hind end, like kind of just pushing themselves back into the hand. And it's not how it's supposed to be in any discipline, right? In any discipline. And I'm not saying that there's not instances and moments where the horse coming into a bit of a physical contact that is felt and weighted is not appropriate. I'm not saying that, right? But for something like that to be the case all the time is definitely an issue. And particularly in a moment where a horse kind of takes off, you know, you're better off to bend them around, right? You bend them around, you take the energy out of the hind end, you gain control with a lateral bend. They can't lean against that because it's one direction. And so I said that, right? But when you go to pull on a horse with two hands, they stiffen, they straighten, and they actually gain more power and momentum in that way. And that's why I yelled at my wife and was like, can't stop a run off with two hands. And everybody in that place was like, have you lost your mind? And I'm like, it's true, right? It's just not a very popular piece of advice in that environment. It doesn't make it not true, right? Some people might be like, oh, that's terrible advice. It's like, still true, right? And so that's an extreme situation of a horse taking off. But even when we're riding our horses and we look at the horse starting to lean into our hand, right, that lean creates stiffness. You don't want the stiffness to be in there. And so when we're pulling, if a horse starts to get stiff on us and we try to pull softness into that horse in some capacity, we're trying to go to two hands and it doesn't work. It actually does the opposite of what we want to have happen, right? And that's where oftentimes I talk to my students about when you use your rein aids to make sure that horse, if they do lean against the bridle, that they're not pulling on you, but rather they might lean on the bridle, they might lean on the bit or lean on the hackamore, but they're leaning on themselves, right? It's them versus them. And that's an approach. That's how you're using your aids to where they find the way off of it. They find the softness in the response to find that peace within the aid. And so that's more detail oriented than what we're going to get into this. So this is pulling versus bumping here, right? And so pulling creates stiffness. We've established that. And pulling creates lots of issues like horses running off and all of these sorts of things. Now, bumping, okay, absolutely has to happen with a hackamore, right? If you pull on a horse in this, it's a glorified halter. It's a very fancy halter. It's way more effective than a halter, so I'm not minimizing it, but it's a soft, flexible noseband for simplified terms, okay? The hackamore is. If you can teach them to run through this pretty quickly. So if they lean on you and you just pull on them, they're going to lean back. Well, they do that in the bit too, but if you put enough for that particular horse pressure in that horse's mouth, they might think a little bit differently about leaning it, but you will still start to create the horse's thought process of leaning on that. Versus if we're actually talking about getting a horse to truly be responsive, to get that horse to actually respond from the signals that we're giving through our leg, through our seat, through our hand, if that's really what we're after. So that horse is not just operating off of physical pressure of us pressing a leg into him, pressing a spur into him, pulling on the reins, to where it's not all just predicated on the physicalness, but the horse is able to start responding to the more subtle aids, to where they can be more focused, they can be more relaxed, they can be more responsive, they can be softer, and there's less physical clashing in how we work with our horses. This is how you get to eventual self-collection down the road. Is it's way more fun, it's way less effort, and it's way more enjoyable for the horse too. And so that really establishes the physical effects of pulling on a horse, but then we have to get into the mental side, and this is going to create a bridge into the bumping here, so we're going to go through this pretty quickly. When a horse is doing that undesired behavior, if they're leaning into the bridle, if they're running off, if they're whatever that physical nature of them getting heavy is. And this, honestly, to be honest with you about this, is that this even goes with a horse that runs through a leg, right? The trap of more leg, more leg, more leg, more leg. Like, it's a trap, okay? It doesn't work, and it doesn't work for the same reasons that pulling on a horse doesn't work. And what ends up happening on a mental level is, I want you to picture that horse is thinking about leaning into your hand, that horse, and they're pulling against you, or the horse is running off. If you gather up two hands and you start pulling on them back, that's a constant stream of input that is going in that. So you might be increasing the amount of pressure in your hands, but it's one constant stream. Like, when you take a hold, you're keeping pulling until that horse gets soft. You're keeping pulling until that horse stops. You keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. So that horse has one constant stream of thought of leaning, pushing, running off, and you have one constant input, okay? And nothing changes other than the amount of pressure. Well, guess what? If you increase the amount of pressure in your hands, and let's say it doesn't get the desired result, because most of the time it won't, that horse is also, they go from I'm leaning to now I'm getting faster, I'm getting faster, I'm getting faster, now I'm checking out and running off. Like, it escalates. Just as you will escalate the pressure in your hand, oftentimes that horse will escalate their leaning into your hand, they're pulling into your hand, them running off. It both the extremes go together. Like, you're doing more and they're doing more, right? And you're both doing more of things you don't want to be pulling on your horse. That horse doesn't want to be pulled on. You don't want the horse running off, and fundamentally the horse doesn't want to run off either, right? Because if a horse is running off or leaning, they're putting themselves in a position where they don't feel good, right? They're investing into getting more frantic, getting more stiff, feeling more physical resistance. Those are things. The horse naturally wants peace and presence, softness, right? They don't want that type of experience, and so they might do it because they've been taught to do it, they've had success doing it, or because they have fight, flight, freeze, fidget, like they have some kind of survival response going on, but they don't want to be doing that. The horse doesn't want to be in survival mode in that instance, right? Much of the fix of this comes down to understanding how the mind and the emotions work with a horse, right? We're physically trying to talk about getting a change for a horse to be softer and more responsive. But on the mental, emotional level, we want that horse to be more at peace, more focused, more relaxed, more listening to what we have to share with them in the process. And so the issue is that when you constantly pull, that horse has one stream of thought, you have one stream of input, and as they go, they both escalate together, but they don't lead to the desired outcome, right? And so we have to change this up for this to work, right? Which is where bumping comes in. And I talk about this in that video discussing, why, if you want to become a better horseman, you should learn how to ride in a hackamore. And the reason being is that if you pull on this hackamore, you need to go watch the video if you're interested in it, but the big piece of this that connects to this video is understanding that you cannot pull on this hackamore and get a horse soft. You will teach them to run through it, just as it happens in the snaffle, right? But you can tolerate more pull in the snaffle and get away with it because of where the bit's located. With the hackamore, how do you get that horse to stay softer? You bump, right? You bump, and it works with your leg. It works with a spur. A spur's a little bit different. We always say spurs are for stroking, not poking, right? Also depends on the type of rowel and the type of spur you have on. And okay, we're not getting into spurs in this video. If you guys are interested in that, you can let me know in the comments. But then it's with a crop and with your rein aids. right? That when we start to set up those aids, we have to have life to our body. We have to have life in our leg, life in our hands, life in our reins, which life means energy, right? Energy is life. Like we have to have energy in those. And so when a horse starts to get stiff, like a half halt is not a pull. A half halt is a bump, right? By nature, it's a bump. If someone half halts and their half halt is a pull, the horse might rate back off of that for a second, but then you've given that horse something to lean to, and then they will start to get heavier, right? A proper half halt is a half halt. You halt them off, and then you release. It's by nature, it is a bump. But whether it's in your groundwork, your ridden work, on the physical level, we do not want to give our horses something to lean on. The hackamore or the snaffle is a point of reference for their balance. Okay, that comes from a friend of mine, Patrick King, who's very integrated in the horsemanship and the dressage community. And he was the one that shared that with me. It's like, want to think about that bit, wherever we place the bit by using the rein aids to adjust where that bit goes in the universe, right? Because the horse should be following that feel, following that direction that we give them about where we want that bit to go. We're directing the bit and the horse is adjusting accordingly. Then that is a point of reference for that horse's balance, right? And if the horse starts to lean on that, we can half halt them, we can bump them off of that and say, no, that's not to be leaned on, right? And they go, oh, okay, I stay within the aids. They're not out in front of it. They're not pushing or pulling on it. And so it's a little bit of a bump. English world say half halt. Western world can say, hey, just bump them off of that a little bit. And that way that horse does it, because if they lean, they get out of balance, right? They start to pull, they start to lean, creates all kinds of issues, right? Already discussed those. The other thing, though, with the bump is that, let's say a horse is thinking about leaning, thinking about pulling, thinking about taking off or getting fast, right? On a mental level, that horse has a thought, and it goes through the neural pathways in their brain, okay? They have that stream of thought. If we pull and their thought is strong enough, that thought continues because we're pulling, but it's not enough to stop that thought. The thought is still going through the neural pathways. Like, think about like those, like, those cool like brain images that we see like on videos, right? Of the electrical signals that's going through the brain, right? Well, if we bump, physically we can adjust the horse's posture, but mentally we can disrupt that thought. If we bump with good timing, if we bump as much as we need to disrupt the thought, if the thought gets disrupted, the horse's body will change, okay? And so we bump off of that, and they go, what? Okay, what do I need? That's not the answer, right? And then we go, try this instead. And we disrupt the thought and then redirect the thought. We disrupt the energy that they're putting into that thought, and they go, what? And then we say, take that energy this way. And it's really important from a horse's confidence and learning ability that it's not just no, right? But rather, not that, try this, right? And I use that with kids. Like, we got 2 young kids, and we utilize a lot of redirection of that. But because if I tell, and I'm not going to get into the whole conversation of no. I could do a whole nother video on that with horses and kids and how important that is as a training philosophy of training horses and training kids, if you will. But being able to disrupt that thought. On the emotional sphere of this part is really, really important too, is that if a horse starts to get emotional, if they're going from the parasympathetic and they're ticking up and they're reaching that sympathetic, and hopefully they haven't gone overboard, but if they do, being able to, if you pull on them, you end up with the same physical issues. They pull on that, they lean on that, but you don't disrupt that thought. If a horse is starting to get too emotional and you can bump them and disrupt that emotional state of mind and they focus, which is why my 4-step sequence when working with our horses is first they focus, then they relax, then they can understand. By understanding, that means that they can either tap into their own understanding or they listen to me for the understanding that they need to do, right? They listen to me for the understanding and for the guidance. And the last one is balance, right? And so if the thoughts start to frazzle and the emotions start to frazzle and I bump them, I get the focus back, and then I can direct that focus and help them. And the more they focus to me, then they can relax. And the more they relax, the more they can learn, right? But if they're emotional, I need to get them focused back to where they're they basically come to a meditative state of mind, which is why I said when we work with our horses, we want it to be like a working meditation that we're working with them. And so that they can focus and find peace within the session. And if they start to get a little too emotional, bump, come back to me. And they're like, oh, okay, what? And I'm like, I got you. Here, find some presence, find some peace in the fact that I will provide you with the guidance you need. You don't need to worry about all this other stuff that you got running around through your noggin, right? And then they can come back to me. We can provide the direction. The direction can help them further focus, further relax, and then if they're really emotional, they're not going to learn anything, but once they get back into a healthy state of mind, then they can start to learn something. They can start to understand, develop their understanding of what needs to happen, and as that happens, then they can get into balance, right? So it's also understanding that the physical bump affects the mind and the emotions as well. Now, if you float their teeth and they just needed a slight little bump, right? And I'm talking about just barely enough for them to feel it in the corner of the mouth. Maybe they just need it barely for you to take the slack out of the reins and you float their teeth with the rein. You might send them into an emotional state of mind because it's not just what you do, it's how you do it. Right? Now, there's other times that horses are flat taken off and they're almost checked out, and you might have to bump them about as hard as you can. And and here's the thing. That doesn't sound cushy, and it's not cushy, and none of us want to do it. But that doesn't mean that it's not necessary. That doesn't mean that it's not what it takes. And a lot of people be like, well, that horse wasn't prepared enough. That's not life, okay? We're talking about practical horsemanship, practical situations. And so you do as little as you have to, but as much as necessary, right? As little as you have to. Why would you do more? Why would you bump harder, bump more firm if you didn't have to? You shouldn't, right? And when you do just enough, then you can continue doing less, right? Because the horse becomes more responsive to more. And so, but if we don't do enough, if we don't go the distance, and some people aren't willing to do what it takes, then you're not serving the horse. If the horse needs to be bumped more firmly on the halter so that way they refocus, so that way they change how they're thinking about a situation, and that helps them find the answer sooner, and you're not willing to do it, then you're not really leading your horse, right? And it doesn't mean that it's not, just because you're not willing to do it doesn't mean that's not what it takes. And I think that that's a common thing that we see in society, is that there's a lot of things that people are like, I'm just not willing to do it. And it's like, but that doesn't mean that it's not what it's required. Success in life takes what success takes. Like, success doesn't discriminate, right? And so it takes what it takes to get the result at the end of the day. And that means it takes what it takes. It means it might take and everyone wants to take this, and I already know where people, if they make it this far in the video, are going to blow it out proportion and be like, you're saying that we should just get super firm. The number one comment that I get at clinics when I go teach is, oh man, you got firmer on our horses sooner, but then you were able to be way softer and way lighter, and you weren't nagging them and you weren't pestering them nearly as much as me. You were way quieter after them. Like, yeah, you had to bump them on the halter, you had to spank them on the bum with the end of the lead rope, right? But you did it 2 or 3 times, and the horse was like, oh, okay, I understand. Now I'm focused. Now I'm more present. Now I'm more relaxed. And now I understand what you're looking for. And then I was able to do less with their horses. Whereas some people come in there and they think, oh, he's going to make me be really from my horse. And I'm like, no, just be more clear sooner. And then that way you can do less. And that way that the horse can enjoy the experience more, and you can enjoy the experience more. And that's ultimately what we're after, is that we want it to be fun and peaceful for us, and we want it to be fun and peaceful for our horses. But there's a physical element to working with horses, and if we don't usually it comes from addressing the mind, and sometimes we have to do something, and we have to do something physical to get to the mind. And if we're not willing to do whatever physical thing needs to be done to get through the mind, we're not going to get the result that we want. And just because you're not willing to do it doesn't mean that it's not necessary. And so it's either you're going to do what the horse needs you to do, or you're not going to do this. And I have this conversation a lot with people that come, that I've had people, assistants and interns that have come through, and I say there's one choice. You might think that you have multiple choices when you work with horses, But you have one choice, and that is to do what the horse needs you to do. That is your only choice that you have while you're here. And if you decide to take the easy road, if you decide to do the thing that would make you feel better when you know full well that the horse needs you to do something else, and you do not do what you know the horse needs you to do, in order for that horse to be in a better place, to be progressing, to do what that horse needs you to do, to set them up for success. If you don't do, because there's only one choice in that moment. If you don't do that one thing, and you make the decision to take the easy road or skirt around or do something else because you're trying to avoid something that might be uncomfortable, you'll go out the same gate that you came in. You just won't come back through it. Because there's only one choice, is to serve the horse, to do what the horse needs us to do. That's the only choice we have if we're truly dedicated. If all the people that are caught up in their feelings that say, I want my horse to be like this. We all really want the same things with our horses. It's just that other people let their feelings dictate their actions. Like, I just don't feel like I can do that. But you could do it. You're just letting your feelings stop you from doing it, right? And when you start realizing it's not about you, it's about serving the horse. And the more that we serve our horses, the further they get in their education, the more physically fit, emotionally fit, mentally fit they are, the better education they have, the more fun things we can do with them, right? So if we focus on serving the horse at a higher level, which means that we do what the horse needs us to do, then we can do almost anything we want to with our horses, right? And all of this has transpired, right? We're going to leave all this in this video and in this podcast because this is the truth. And that's the only thing that matters, is that, pulling does not work, right? I'm not saying that you won't ever pull, the horse might not pull, and you might let the horse pull against themselves. That's a whole other conversation. But fundamentally, between pulling and bumping, when you operate your aids in your body with life and energy to that, to where there's a flow state, and then the horse starts to lean and you bump them off of that, particularly in time with their mind first, so that the body can make the adjustment, things get softer, things get more relaxed, the horse gets more focused, the horse takes more responsibility, things become much easier for both you and the horse, right? But if we let our feelings get us trapped up on, I don't want to bump on my horse, right? It doesn't mean that still won't be what serves the horse best. And so this is something that is really, really, really important. I'm tackling like the human element of this at the end, because you might have some limiting beliefs and limiting thought processes about why you will or won't be willing to do it. The thing is that the gauge is to do as little as you have to, but as much as necessary, right? If you do too much, the horse, as I mentioned earlier, might become more emotional and more reactive, but that's okay. Just don't make the mistake again. Just learn from it. We've all done too much. I've bumped on a horse more firm than was necessary. Okay? You know what I can do after I do that? Once I get control of the situation or whatever's going on, I say, hey, sorry, horse, and I pat him on the neck, and I'm like, my bad. And we move on. Horses can live in the moment. We should learn from that. Horses are much better at living in the moment. Because they're much learning, we can say, hey, I made that mistake. I'm sorry about that. I'll do better next time. And go do better next time, right? And if you're like, well, I don't know if I'm doing enough. Is it getting better or is it getting worse? Right? Did you get a different response that was in the direction that you wanted? Or is the same problem getting worse? Right? Is the horse getting more faster? Is the horse getting more stiff? Then you probably didn't do enough, right? Or maybe you need to try to do something a little differently, right? Of bumping in time with a different foot, or, a different exercise, but not allowing that horse to lean. So you bump them off and back them up, and then turn them to the left or turn them to the right. And if they lean through the left shoulder, you bump them off the left rein and bump them off your left foot a little bit and say, no, don't lean on that. Stay within the aids, right? Because when they're within the aids, there's no physical resistance. It's peaceful within the aids. But they start leaning on the boundaries. No, stay within the boundaries, right? And that means that their mind has to stay within the moment. They have to stay with you. They're staying more connected. And then it's a beautiful thing, right? So fundamentally simple, but we have to understand. Everyone's like, why don't you just show us, right? Like, You have to have the understanding. I can show you guys how to do this stuff, which I do in our Cavi community, by the way. Right? I haven't mentioned that, but we have our Cavi community. I'll link it down below. You can join that. It has an app. It has a bunch of videos. There's a community thread where you can ask your questions about your horses, and you can get my help with that in there. And I want to help you do that. And there's step-by-step training videos. There's real raw training videos. There's case studies. There's all sorts of stuff, and I'm continually adding to that in there. The fact of the matter, though, is that if you don't have the right perspective and the understandings and the beliefs of when you go to work with your horse, you won't be doing what you need to be doing, how you need to do it, right? Because it's not just what we do, it's how we do it. These types of, if you call them tack room conversations or tack room talks, if you will, are about having the right understanding and the right perspective and the right belief systems. And I say right, I'm sharing with you what has worked for me. I'm sharing with you what has worked with thousands of people and horses that I've worked with over the last 15 plus years. Okay. These are the things that I've found to work best for me. It's worked with thousands of horses, thousands of people. And I just want to share them with you because it's what works, right? So it's the right way because it works. Is it the only way? I'm not saying it's the only way, but it comes down to principles. And principles are true. And the most important thing that we can be pursuing is what is true. And to this point in my journey, I know this to be true, right? And that's why I'm sharing this with you. So be mindful when you go work with your horses to not be pulling on them, but to have life through your body, through your rein aids, through your legs, right? So that way that energy can flow. And when you feel a resistance, you can support through the rein aid without pulling. And if they start to lean and pull on you, you can bump them off of that to where they can make the mental and the physical adjustments that are necessary to stay within the aids. And so that's what I will leave you with. I really appreciate you being here. If you haven't hit the follow button or the subscribe button or anything like that or left the 5-star review on the podcast, we really appreciate that. And the only reason I ask you to do that is my mission is to educate horses and people with a lifetime in mind. I want to help you have the knowledge and the information and the skills that you can use with your own horses and to help other horses and to help other people, whoever you come in contact with along your journey. And by you liking, subscribing, doing these what seem like superficial things, it does help us reach more people. It does help. Like if you share the video, I'm forever thankful, right? But doing those things allows us to reach more people so that we can, I firmly believe in being the change that we want to see in the industry by not gatekeeping, by getting this information out there and by supporting you guys, supporting everyone to where this industry can become a better place, because at the core of this is together we rise. The better that all of us get in our horsemanship, the better we can serve our horses, the better the industry gets. And we have a vast need for higher quality horsemanship in this world, and it takes action. You have access to so much knowledge, so much information. You can sit here and listen to me share these thoughts and these experiences and with you, but you've got to go put it to action. And that's where, if you are a person of action and you go, that's what the Cavi community is for. Very frankly, it's not, if you're just curious, but you're not serious about your horsemanship, it's not for you. It's for those that are actually serious about diving deep, right? If you're serious about your horsemanship and you really want to get better, then I want to invite you to check it out, join us over there, because that's what we do, right? Is we get into the serious stuff that it takes to get real results with our horses. Whether you're a professional or you're a recreational amateur rider, that's what it's for. I created it to help you, right? To help you along your journey, so that you can have a support system that shares similar like-minded values. And so that's what it's there for. You know it exists. I hope that this video helps you. If you've got questions, right? I always check the Cavi community questions first. You're welcome to drop them down in the YouTube comments as well. If you've got questions, we use a lot of those questions to create future videos and those sorts of things. So with that being said, y'all, thanks for being here, and we'll catch you next time.